Number 9. Roid Rage Killing. Bodybuilder Sally McNeil and her husband Ray McNeil were both ex-Marines with a relationship that left much to be desired. On Valentine's Day in 1995, 8 stormy years of marriage came to a brutal end. Sally was angry when Ray reached their Oceanside, California house after 10 p.m. that night. She had been obsessing over where he was all evening and desperately waiting for him to arrive home. She started yelling and asking where he'd gone, while Ray just stood at the stove frying chicken. The quarrel became more heated, and one of Sally's children claimed to have heard a gurgling sound as if her mother was being strangled. Minutes after that, Sally walked into a closet and pulled out a 12-gauge shotgun. She shot Ray twice in the stomach and jaw, but she wasn't finished. Sally then walked into the bedroom to load the revolver again, and she returned to the kitchen and shot him in the head. Their kids, who had seen all of this happen, were traumatized and ran out of the home yelling at the top of their lungs. She followed the kids out and gave the shotgun to her next-door neighbor, saying that Ray had been abusing her and that she had shot him in self-defense. In a state of daze, Sally waited for the police to arrive, who immediately took her into custody. It was later discovered that both of them had been under the influence of heavy steroids. This earned them the name of the Roid Rage Killing. The killing did not come as a shock to those who were close to the couple. Sally's behavior had been progressively getting worse. On one occasion, she was charged for pulling out a gun on her first husband and smashing his car windows with a crowbar. She was also known to drop a heavy weight from a balcony onto Ray's car as he was leaving for work. During her trial, the prosecutor suggested that Sally killed her husband for the insurance money, because he was planning on leaving her. They also claimed that the murder was planned since she went back to her room to reload the rifle. After a few hours of deliberation, Sally was found guilty of murdering her husband for financial gain. She was sentenced to detention and will be eligible for parole in her late 60s. Number 8. Gold's Gym Rampage. In October of 2011, a 32-year-old weightlifter named Chad Brothers entered a Gold's Gym in New York and went on a terrifying rampage. He walked into the gym and started wrecking the place by throwing things and pushing equipment over. Then, when the cops showed up to arrest him for his violent frenzy, he had a heart attack when they were forced to use a taser on him. According to the police chief, Chad had attacked a female officer and injured an innocent gym-goer. The only way to stop the Hulk was with a slight shock of electricity. But what caused Chad to lose his mind? The cops were initially called after Chad punched a man who was just minding his business, running on a treadmill. Then he really lost his mind. He started destroying weight machines and chucking dumbbells across the room. When a female officer showed up and realized she was dealing with a man who had clearly injected himself with far too many steroids, she had no choice but to jolt him with her taser. But Chad didn't go down with the first zap. Multiple officers had to zap him 4 or 5 times and beat him with their batons before he was finally down for the count. Nobody gets hit with a taser that many times without some serious damage. Once he was subdued, the cops rushed him to the hospital. Sadly, he died from cardiac arrest shortly after he arrived. Nobody knows what triggered his outburst, but experts believe it was steroids that caused his rage. Number 7. Power Couple. Melissa James was ecstatic at the prospect of working as the personal assistant to professional bodybuilders Craig Titus and Kelly Ryan. The married couple were well known in the bodybuilding world and had enjoyed a lot of success. We also imagine that the couple and their assistant had some good times along the way. What's difficult to imagine now is how things went so wrong in the end. On December 14, 2005, Melissa James was discovered burnt beyond identification in the trunk of Kelly Ryan's Jaguar. According to the findings, she'd been killed in the most horrific way. She was assaulted, drugged, jolted with a taser, and injected with morphine before being strangled and finally burned. Duct tape had also been used to wrap around her head. The coroner was able to peel away the tape during the examination and observed that it had created a gruesome death mask. Her body had been so badly battered that the coroner was unable to determine the actual cause of death, or if she had been alive when she had been put inside the car trunk. Following the murder, the pair went on the run, sparking a countrywide manhunt. They were detained 9 days later at a manicure salon in a Boston suburb. The couple said that Melissa died of an overdose, so they burned her body before fleeing town, claiming they had done so out of fear that the publicity might damage their careers. Police were not convinced. After further questioning, Craig confessed to having an extramarital relationship with Melissa that Kelly was unaware of. He was also using steroids and other substances. The couple then changed their story and said that their personal assistant had stolen their car, so they did not have any clue how she was found dead in the trunk. But the security footage from a nearby Walmart proved otherwise. Kelly was spotted with a shopping cart stocked with 7 bottles of lighter fluid and a barbecue set on the day of the murder. Titus was also seen on video aiding his wife in placing items into the back of the car. At the time, police suspected James was already inside the trunk dead. This was what prosecution needed to secure their case. After the footage came out, Craig Titus agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder, first-degree abduction, and arson. Kelly Ryan admitted to arson and battery with a deadly weapon, resulting in serious bodily harm. Number 6. Tearing a muscle. In early 2021 in Dubai, Ryan Big Rig Crowley had one of the worst days possible at the gym when his pectoral muscle tore right off his bone. He didn't just simply tear a muscle, it literally detached itself from his skeleton. Ouch! Ryan and his friend, who is also a powerlifter, Larry Wheels, were pumping iron at a local gym when they started pumping each other up. They were excitedly telling each other that they could lift more and more. Ryan added an extra 88 pounds, or just about 40 kilograms, to his bench press, totaling a weight of 485 pounds, or 220 kilograms. But that weight was just too much for his body to handle. The whole thing was captured on video. He tore his muscle right in the middle of his bench press. In the disturbing footage, you can even see his pectoral tendon jutting out of his skin from where it had been ripped off the bone. Ryan immediately collapsed on the floor in agony and was rushed to the hospital. His whole arm and all the way down his torso were covered in bruises. Doctors had to completely reconstruct his pec, and it will take a considerable amount of time to recover. Safe to say, he won't be powerlifting anytime soon. Number 5. Snapped leg. If you think tearing a muscle is bad, listen to this. In March of 2017 at an Indian gym, a man named Ambrish Patel snapped his knee on a leg press machine in the middle of his workout. One of his friends was filming as he pushed hundreds of pounds on the leg press. He was moving a lot of weight and it was pretty impressive until his body decided, nope. His leg bent back the wrong way and snapped like a twig. The video of the horrific accident has been viewed over 90 million times since it was uploaded to Facebook. After his leg snaps, the video shows Patel starting to panic. He puts his other foot on the floor and struggles to get out from under the heavy weights. In the second clip, he is seen lying on the floor while others rush to help. Patel was a regular at the gym and often used the leg press. An employee that was working there said that after the incident, Patel actually seemed like he was doing okay. He couldn't work out anymore and it would take him 6 months to fully heal, but his leg should recover. What's the worst injury you've seen at the gym? Tell us in the comments below. Number 4. Psycho bodybuilder. While breakups can sometimes bring the worst out of you, John Riccardi took the end of his relationship to the next level. He made sure that his ex, Connie Navarro, lived a life of misery and fear before eventually killing her. In 1983, Connie Navarro and her friend Sue Jory were shot and killed in Navarro's West Los Angeles apartment. Her ex-boyfriend, bodybuilder John Riccardi, was the main suspect. Friends and family told horrific tales about how John had been stalking Connie months prior to the killing. One such incident came from Connie's son David, who said that a week before the murder, John had broken into their home and handcuffed him while pointing a gun. Maybe he took too much pre-workout. Maybe he was on way too many steroids. The real motive is unclear. The day following the murders, John vanished into thin air and wasn't seen again for the next 8 years. This was devastating for the family because the killer had gotten away, or so they thought. After a segment of America's Most Wanted aired, the show's viewers were able to provide information that led authorities to a condo in Houston. Riccardi appeared to be living a life of luxury, and he was reportedly supporting himself by committing burglaries. When he was arrested, money, diamonds, and other valuables were discovered in his home. Witnesses testified that Riccardi became increasingly hostile towards Navarro since their breakup, despite his denial that he harassed her or had anything to do with her murder. He was convicted of 2 charges of first-degree murder and got the death sentence. The California Supreme Court eventually overturned the sentence and amended it to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 3. The It Couple. Gordon Kimbrough and Christy Ramsey were the it couple in the bodybuilding scene in San Francisco. They had both won solo prizes and had won the USA Pairs title together in 1991. Their personal relationship behind closed doors was entirely different altogether. Gordon had admitted to having affairs with other women. Not only was he a cheater, but he was also hitting Christy on a regular basis. In the end, it became too much to cope with and Christy left him. Unable to really let each other go, they got back together with one condition from Christy: they had to do couples therapy. They planned to get married after the relationship had finally calmed down, but things took a slight detour when, surprisingly, Christy met and fell in love with another man. Gordon was enraged when she told him she wanted to end their 4-year relationship and call off the wedding. He allegedly slapped her across the face, then put an electrical cord around her neck 3 times and knotted it. He then stabbed her in the throat twice with a kitchen knife, and when the police arrived at the scene, he was discovered holding a syringe to his neck. Gordon took the uncommon step of testifying in his own defense, stating that the murder was committed in a fit of rage. He anticipated a lighter punishment, but he was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. Number 2. Slip of the wrist. During the Christmas season of 2016 in central Iowa, 22-year-old Iowa State University student Kyle Thompson went to the gym to work out. He was a regular at the Elite Edge Transformation Center in Kenny. It was just a normal Monday morning and Kyle was working out with a barbell. He was lying on his back lifting it over his head. That's when everything went horribly wrong in a split second. The barbell slipped from his hand, falling and crushing his neck. Mark Jans, spokesman for the gym, said in a statement that Kyle was bench pressing 350 pounds or about 143 kilograms at the time of the accident. There were people spotting him when the barbell slipped, but none of them were quick enough to grab the bar before it landed on his throat. They were able to get it off of him, but the damage had already been done. An ambulance was called and Kyle was taken to the hospital where he was pronounced dead from the injury. That much weight falling directly on his throat was just too much to come back from. It was like an elephant stepped directly on his neck. And it wasn't like Kyle didn't know what he was doing. He was a smart and fit guy. He knew exactly how to work out properly. It was just a freak accident, a slip of the wrist. Number 1. Revenge. In 2017, Memorez Rackley, who was married but separated from her husband, had been dating bodybuilder Jeremy Patterson for about 6 months. They both enjoyed working out and they had a personal trainer in common. Memorez hadn't fully let Jeremy into her life though. She didn't introduce him to her friends or kids or even post pictures of them together. Apparently, she didn't feel the same and she decided to call it quits on the 1st of June. This left Jeremy extremely angry, plotting his revenge. Jeremy approached Memorez and her sons the next day in the parking lot of a nail salon. Using harsh words, he told her kids that he had been in a relationship with their mom. Jeremy also informed the boys that he would kill them. He followed them out of the salon in his car and tried to run them off the road. Jeremy then uploaded nude revenge images of Memorez on her son's soccer team's Instagram page. He also sent Memorez a picture of her children by text and threatened to harm them. Jeremy texted Memorez on June 6th apologizing for his actions and telling her that she was his sunshine. That same afternoon, Memorez went to pick up her boys from school when Jeremy confronted them. The pair got into an intense verbal dispute, and Memorez and her sons ran down the street to get away from him. Memorez worried for her kids' safety, so she flagged down an SUV with 3 young girls and a woman and asked them for a ride. As soon as Jeremy saw them get in the SUV, he left in the other direction, only to turn around back and block the SUV from leaving. Jeremy then got out of the car, gun in hand, and shot Memorez point blank. Jeremy then began shooting through the rear passenger window. 3 of the children were injured, while Memorez was killed after being shot 3 times.
Number 10. Rambo. 48-year-old Joseph Manuel Hunter supervised a makeshift group of international mercenaries and assassins. He was arrested in Thailand in 2013 and was sentenced to 20 years in prison for planning to kill a DEA agent. Joseph served in the United States Army as a highly experienced sniper from 1983 to 2004. He spent time teaching others how to operate as snipers and even served as a drill sergeant for a short period as well. By the time he left Army service, Joseph was a highly decorated veteran. His defense attorney, Marlon Curtin, stated that his client's criminal actions were motivated by his mental illness and PTSD, which stemmed from the time he served in Iraq. The former soldier was taken into custody in September of 2013 after a successful sting operation that took place the year prior, where Hunter's boss, Paul LaRue, was arrested. Paul agreed to work with the authorities to pursue other contract killers like Joseph. In exchange for $800,000, Hunter and his team of mercenaries agreed to kill a DEA agent and informant. They set up their temporary base of operations in Thailand, where the arrest would eventually take place. It is also believed that this small criminal group helped carry out a drug deal, which involved 661 pounds of cocaine. There's definitely more that we don't know about, but luckily, Joseph and his group won't be able to do much harm from behind bars. Number 9. Colin Reeves. On November 21, 2021, 35-year-old former Army Commando Colin Reeves murdered 2 people in Somerset, England. The victims' names were Stephen and Jennifer Chappell. The killer knew the Chappells because they lived next door to each other in a recently built housing development. Apparently, there were multiple anger-fueled exchanges between Reeves and the Chappells over parking issues, including one where he called Jennifer a fat bitch, as well as other horrifying insults. Reeves entered the home of his victims while their children slept, then stabbed them each 6 times. The murder weapon he used was a ceremonial dagger that was gifted to him after his service in the army concluded. The veteran who fought in Afghanistan admitted in court that he stabbed the couple. By pleading guilty, he's eligible for a lesser charge. As to why he killed the 2, Reeves and his wife had recently been having issues with a relationship. Only 40 minutes before the murder, his partner, Kaylee, formally asked to separate from Colin. A psychiatrist named Dr. Lucy Bacon also did a mental assessment on Reeves and found that he had moderate depression, but no significant symptoms of PTSD. The doctor went on to say that while she believes Colin's depression may have played a role in his actions, it wouldn't have been the sole cause. For his terrible crimes, Colin Reeves was sentenced to life in prison. He has a minimum term of 38 years, but it's more than likely that he'll never know freedom again. Number 8. Mercenaries. In October 2021, Aaron Adolf G. and Achim A. were taken into custody in the southern region of Germany. The 2 former soldiers were accused of leading a terrorist group. Their goal was to somehow intervene with the Yemen military conflict by working as a mercenary group. They wanted to try and recruit around 150 men with past experience working as soldiers or police officers in order to benefit their cause. Despite these lofty goals, it's believed only 7 or so people thought about joining the group. To earn money, Aaron and Akeem figured they could charge outside parties hefty sums for mercenary services. Akeem tried many times to contact the Saudi Arabian government to offer their help dealing with the Houthi rebels in Yemen. However, the country never formally responded. Prosecutors say the 2 ex-soldiers were well aware of what crimes would be involved with this kind of work. They would almost certainly have to kill people if they ever actually were hired. As a result, Aaron was ordered to serve an 18-month prison sentence, while Akeem was given 14 months. Number 7. Smugglers. Former American soldiers, 22-year-old Emmanuel Opongagiare and 19-year-old Ralph Gregory St. Joey, were arrested in Hebronville, Texas for crimes related to smuggling in the summer of 2021. The 2 young men were hired to transport a group of Mexican immigrants 240 miles from McAllen to San Antonio, Texas. They were only giving a ride to 2 people in this case, and they were both handed $100 in order to pay for gas. Apparently, the 2 didn't even know how much money they'd be paid after finishing the job, yet they risked everything to do it. The man who hired Emmanuel and Ralph was named Isaiah Gore. He specifically told the soldiers to wear their uniform while smuggling the Mexican nationals to avoid looking suspicious. Despite following this advice, the men were stopped in Hebronville at a border control point. While searching their vehicle, authorities found the 2 illegal immigrants in the soldiers' trunk. For their crimes, Emmanuel was sentenced to serve 21 months in prison, while Ralph was given 13. As has been the case in the past, they will likely be discharged from their official army positions. Number 6. Tyler Griffiths. In England, during the spring of 2019, a woman was working in a Halifax mini market alone, when suddenly, a young man holding a kitchen knife walked in. He was wearing a balaclava to cover his face, and he tried to break open the cash register by himself. When he wasn't able to, he held the knife towards the worker, telling her to open it for him. Before leaving with hundreds in cash, he turned to the woman and said, "Don't call the police or I will kill you." The entire interaction was caught by security CCTV cameras. The robber would have gotten away with it if only he'd been wearing gloves when he committed the crime. Police were able to identify the 22-year-old former soldier Tyler Griffiths based on some distinguishing tattoos that were seen on his hands. While taking the stolen money, the tattoos were clearly visible. Tyler also carried out another robbery a week before and allegedly pushed a 75-year-old shopkeeper after stealing money. It's believed he needed money to pay off a debt he built up from buying cocaine. When police arrested him, they found some of the drug on him. His defense attorney even told the court that someone told him to commit the crimes to have his debt forgiven. But who knows whether or not that's true. In the end, the Bradford Crown Court found Tyler Griffiths guilty and sentenced him to spend 3 years in jail. What do you think should be done in order to help with the growing PTSD issue that's affecting ex-soldiers? Let us know in the comments, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 5. Luke Summer. 36-year-old Luke Summer from Canada used to serve as an Army Ranger, but he decided to turn towards a life of crime instead. He first orchestrated a bank robbery in Tacoma, Washington in 2006. Then, when he was caught, he tried to get someone to assassinate the lawyer prosecuting him. On November 2, 2002, Luke was sentenced to serve 31 years for the crimes he committed in Tacoma. He was originally ordered to serve 24 years in prison in 2008, but with updated testimonies from some of Luke's victims, additional time was added. He robbed the Bank of America on August 7, 2006 with the help of 4 other men. 2 of them carried AK-47s into the bank, while the others had loaded handguns. In addition to this, all of the thieves had body armor on for protection in case things turned dicey with the police. Somehow, the heist was a success and they managed to get away with over 50 grand. However, they didn't get far. A concerned citizen noticed the license plate of the getaway car, and police were able to track down Luke and his accomplices. A month after getting arrested for the robbery, Luke tried to hire an undercover FBI agent to be his hitman. He offered 20 grand to the officer if he took out the previously mentioned attorney. Additional charges resulted from this incident. On top of everything, Luke attacked one of his robbery partners while in a federal detention center. The two were supposed to be in separate cells, but Luke found a way into the man's quarters with a homemade shank. Luckily, guards pulled him off the other prisoner before things could escalate any further. Number 4. Craig Woodhall. On March 29, 2020, 41-year-old veteran Craig Woodhall killed his wife in the middle of the street in Barnsley, England. 31-year-old Victoria ran into the road screaming bloody murder as her husband chased her down. While neighbors watched in horror, Craig tackled his wife to the ground before stabbing her multiple times. When it seemed like he was finally done with her, he walked away, but quickly returned 2 separate times to hurt Victoria even more. Witnesses later called the police to report the violent crime. Not long after the murder, Craig turned himself in. The Woodhall couple had only been married for a few months before the incident took place. Victoria worked as a practitioner at a nearby hospital, while her husband made a living as a forklift driver. Before the murder, people would have described Craig as the textbook definition of a devoted father. But now, it's clear more was going on behind the scenes. With so many people seeing what he did, Craig had little room to argue for himself. It didn't take long for the court to find him guilty, and he was given a life sentence as a result. Number 3. Jalen D. Thomas. Some people might think living on an army base is a lot like summer camp, and sometimes it is. You get to bunk with close friends, live with and eat meals with them, and work together while serving your country. However, sometimes living in such close quarters can weigh on people's minds and make them do some crazy things. An example of this took place on August 6, 2022 in Kansas. 21-year-old former soldier Jalen D. Thomas has since been charged with the murder of Sergeant Stacy Subotich. The two of them were both assigned to an army base in Fort Riley, and on the morning of the crime, a violent altercation broke out involving at least 4 people. When police responded to the scene, they found a man who'd been stabbed in the leg. They also discovered Stacy and quickly tried to rush her to the hospital to treat her injuries. Sadly, Stacy didn't survive. After the fight, Jalen apparently drove himself to get treated for his own stab wounds. It's also believed that another woman was involved in this case and was assaulted by Jalen. It's possible that these two had been in a romantic relationship. Authorities arrested Thomas and he's currently being held in their custody. Not too many details on the case have been released, but Jalen D. Thomas is facing charges of domestic violence, assault, and murder, to name a few. Number 2. Fauji. On November 9, 2022, police arrested a former soldier for theft. It's believed that 27-year-old Harvinder Singh had been at the center of multiple burglaries that have taken place in the Chandigarh, India area over the past year. One of the man's victims called the police on October 29 after coming home to find that their residence had been broken into. Jewelry, as well as a large amount of cash, was stolen in this particular instance. Investigators believe Singh, who also goes by the alias Fuji, was involved in multiple other cases of theft, including stolen scooters, televisions, cameras, and much more. Fuji first joined the army as a soldier in 2015, but thanks to a drug addiction, he had to leave his official post in Jammu Kashmir. After this, he started working as a cab driver to make some cash, but the money wasn't enough, and so Singh resorted to petty crime. Since this case is still so recent, a sentence has yet to be given out. However, Fuji is currently being held in police custody as he waits for his next trial date. Number 1. Anthony Hartley. On September 30, 2022, a homeless veteran named Anthony Matthew Hartley was killed on the streets of Portland. Anthony was a beloved man who did his best to spread joy wherever he went. The 40-year-old man was stabbed once in the neck by 50-year-old Dorian Ambrose Cannon. When police found and questioned the suspect, he claimed he had to kill Hartley for his own humanity. The victim was a large man, standing over 6 feet tall, and he weighed over 200 pounds, which only made his murder all the more confusing for those who knew him. Before his death, Hartley had been homeless off and on for about 18 months, but he didn't let this fact get him down. If anything, it made him more optimistic. One of his childhood friends, Jeff Clam, said that Anthony inspired him to become a case manager and help other veterans find homes. Hartley was on a waiting list to receive a federal grant, so his days of living on the street were almost over. This death was just one of at least 15 documented cases of homeless people in Portland being killed in 2022 alone. Hartley's murder highlights a growing homeless crisis in the United States, which continues to be more dire with every passing day.
Number 10. Grieving Husband. In May 2022, a Greek helicopter pilot named Babis Anagnostopoulos was found guilty of murdering his wife, 20-year-old Caroline Crouch, and hanging their pet dog from the banister. 34-year-old Babis tried to make the crime appear like a gang of criminals had broken into the home and it was a robbery gone wrong. After he killed his wife, he tied himself up and called the police. Cops arrived to find Babis tied up, Caroline dead, and their baby daughter on the ground near her mother. Babis played the part of the grieving husband well enough to get away with the crime temporarily. The media went nuts over the story and everyone felt bad for Babis. That is, until police uncovered the truth. He was arrested shortly after Caroline's funeral ended. Police became suspicious of his story when they couldn't find a trace of the gang he claimed he had tied him up, suffocated his wife, and stole over $16,000 in cash and jewelry. They also became suspicious when data collected from a fitness tracker Caroline wore on her wrist showed her heart had stopped beating before the alleged break-in took place. In court, friends of Caroline testified that Babis was a controlling narcissist. The court also heard about the detailed planning that went into the murder. This included memory cards from closed-circuit television cameras being removed and Babis going into the basement of the home to get his motorcycle gloves 4 hours before Caroline was killed, which he wore to create a crime scene. The jig was finally up. Babis admitted to suffocating Caroline as she was asleep because the couple had gotten into an argument when their daughter fell off the couch while Babis was supposed to be watching her. Caroline had stormed off to bed without apologizing to him, and apparently that was enough to make him want to kill her. Babis was sentenced to 27 years in prison. Number 9. Republic Airways Brawl. In 2019, disturbing video footage leaked showing what looked like a pilot spitting at and fighting with a female flight attendant on a jet bridge at Denver International Airport. The pilot, 36-year-old William Thomas, appeared to start the confrontation by spitting on the woman, 29-year-old Marisha Sporer. She slaps him in the face in response, and then the pilot begins punching her in the face and stomach repeatedly. The footage sparked widespread concerns about the employee's conduct. Their employer, a regional airline known as Republic Airways, quickly reassured the public that there were no passengers on the plane at the time and that both the pilot and his coworker were fired immediately after the incident. But the brawl also caught the attention of police, who opened an investigation into the violence, which took place during a layover. It was eventually discovered that the pair had been involved in a romantic relationship, and that Sporer reportedly saw something that upset her on Thomas's phone. The couple broke up, but apparently couldn't truly let go enough to keep things professional. They decided to sort out their mistakes in the worst place imaginable, at work. They were both charged with assault and disturbing the peace and had to answer to the law in addition to losing their jobs. Number 8. Disorderly pilots. Airlines have had strict standards for their pilots. The United States Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, bans pilots from drinking less than 8 hours before flying. None of that mattered to pilot Thomas Cloyd and co-pilot Christopher Hughes, apparently, though. In 2002, the pair went out drinking in Miami one night when they knew they had to catch an early flight to Phoenix the next morning. Employees at the bar where they were drinking said that they finally kicked them out around 5 a.m. They arrived back at their hotel 30 minutes later and caught a shuttle to the airport 4 hours after that. It was reported that Cloyd acted belligerent as soon as he arrived at the airport. When a security guard told him to throw away his coffee, he refused. He finally complied when police were called. Alcohol could be smelt on his breath, but he denied that he had been drinking. The plane had already been pulled to the runway when officers arrived to arrest the disorderly pilots. TSA staff called the aircraft back to the terminal where breathalyzers revealed that Cloyd's blood alcohol content was .091. Hughes blew a .084. Both were well above the FAA's limit of .04. Their careers were over by then, and investigators soon discovered that Cloyd had 2 prior arrests for alcohol-related offenses that he never revealed to his employer. The case went back and forth between state and federal court before ultimately landing under the jurisdiction of the state of Florida. The pilots tried but failed to get the case thrown out and were sentenced to 5 years and 2.5 years in prison. Number 7. Mid-air meltdown. On a JetBlue flight in 2012, a pilot had a meltdown mid-air. It's horrifying when a passenger on the plane begins acting erratically, but what do you do when it's the pilot? During a trip from New York to Las Vegas, Captain Clayton Osborne allegedly began hitting random buttons and telling air traffic controllers to, quote, quiet down. He started speaking nonsense to First Officer Jason Dowd, saying that they needed to, quote, take a leap of faith, and that, quote, things don't matter, and that, quote, we're not going to Vegas. He then turned the communications radio off, dimmed the equipment monitors, and started rambling on about religion. Co-pilot Dowd used his head and cleverly tricked Osborne into going into the passenger compartment, then locked the cockpit door and changed the code. When Osborne couldn't get back, he told passengers to pray and started running up and down the aisle ranting about Jesus and Al-Qaeda. Thankfully, there were brave passengers on board who tackled him and tied him up with seatbelt extenders. Dowd took over the flight with the help of an off-duty pilot. The plane was diverted and landed safely in Amarillo, Texas. Osborne had worked for JetBlue for 12 years leading up to the incident. He showed up late that day, which was very unusual for him. He was suspended from his job and charged with interference with the flight crew, but was found not guilty by reason of insanity. It was alleged in court documents that a brief psychotic episode was triggered by a lack of sleep. Osborne ended up suing the airlines for not recognizing that he was mentally ill and blamed JetBlue for endangering the lives aboard Flight 191. Would you be brave enough to tackle someone that's acting crazy on a plane? Tell us in the comments, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 6. Shady flying career. Christian Kit Martin had a 30-year career as an Army major before he went on to become a private commercial airline pilot. But in late 2019, his lengthy and successful career was cut short when he was arrested in an airport in Kentucky for allegedly murdering 3 of his neighbors. In 2015, Martin was going through a bitter divorce from his ex-wife Joan. Their neighbor, Calvin Phillips, was helping Joan move her things out of the former couple's home they shared when they discovered classified military documents and other incriminating materials. They reported it to police, and that landed Martin in a court-martial hearing. Phillips was supposed to testify as a witness at the hearing, but never got the chance. He was found dead with multiple gunshot wounds along with his wife Pamela and a third neighbor, Edward Dansereau. Martin was discharged from the Army and started a new life as an American Airlines pilot. Meanwhile, the triple murder case went cold. Investigators reopened the case and new evidence came to light. This time, their findings led them to Martin, who will now spend the rest of his life in prison for killing his neighbors in an attempt to cover up his past crimes. Number 5. Flying frying pan. 54-year-old Andrew McIntosh was a pilot with the Netherlands and Belgium-based company TUI Airways. In 2018, Andrew and his soon-to-be ex-wife Patricia were trying to sell their home in the English village of Nightcote, but the couple couldn't find anyone to buy it. When Andrew suggested lowering the asking price of the house, Patricia refused. This sent him into a rage. Seeing red, he punched and kicked Patricia, then beat her to death with a frying pan. He then foolishly confessed to the act to a friend in a text message. The friend contacted the authorities, who then arrested Andrew. Andrew admitted to killing Patricia, but denied committing murder based on diminished responsibility. In other words, he argued that mental illness, in this case depression, caused him to act in a way he normally wouldn't act if he were in his right mind. He claimed that he simply, quote, lost control. But the judge didn't buy it. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 17 years. The sentence came as good news to Patricia's family, who expressed their disappointment that Andrew forced them to suffer through a trial instead of pleading guilty. Number 4, nervous pilot. When the pilot of TransAsia Airways Flight 235 misconstrued an emergency scenario and turned off the wrong engine, the plane crashed into Taipei's Keelung River. A warning alert for one engine sounded 2 minutes after takeoff, signaling a flameout or power failure. As a result, the pilot mistakenly turned off the only functional engine, remaining oblivious about what he had done for another 2 minutes. Despite being able to restore some of the previously functioning engine's power, too much time, altitude, and speed had been lost. The plane's wing collided with a bridge before the aircraft crashed into the river, killing 43 of the 58 passengers aboard, including both pilots and the crew. In the investigation, audio from the flight surfaced. You can hear the pilot saying, "Wow, pulled back the wrong side throttle." The captain's flight history was examined in depth and criticism increased. He had already failed the abnormal start portion, which entailed going over the correct procedure in the event of an engine burnout during takeoff, in earlier practice sessions, flight simulators, and training. Although he passed, his evaluation said that he was prone to get nervous and may make verbal errors during the engine start procedure. Number 3, just short of the runway. When Asiana Flight 214 crashed while attempting to land at San Francisco International Airport in 2013, 3 persons were killed and 182 were injured. The weather was perfect, and at 11:27 a.m., air traffic control cleared the pilots for a visual approach landing. However, by 11:28, the Boeing 77 had fallen just short of the runway. Within an hour, the plane's autopilot had been accidentally turned off, and the plane began to lose speed and altitude. The tail end of the plane collided with and broke the seawall as it approached too low and too slow. 4 flight attendants were swept out of a hole in the back and critically injured while still strapped into their seats. As the crew jumped into action, the plane began to billow dark smoke and catch fire, and yet the emergency evacuation was just as negligent as the landing. 2 emergency slides were deployed inside, confining and nearly suffocating passengers and crew members. 10 individuals were sent to the hospital in critical condition, and 3 teenage girls died, 2 at the site and 1 later at the hospital. One of the victims, Ye Mengwan, is reported to have survived the crash, only to be run over by a fire truck rushing to the scene. The family of Mengwans filed a claim against the city of San Francisco, but it was eventually dismissed and settled out of court. Number 2, snoozing. On May 22, 2010, an Air India Express Boeing 737 tried to land at India's Mangalore International Airport. It did so briefly before overshooting the runway by 790 feet or just about 240 meters, breaking up into many pieces, erupting in a fireball, and coming to a halt on the side of a steep hill. Despite the fact that both pilots were experienced and had flown into the respective airport 82 times, the aircraft flew in much too high, eventually touching down about a mile beyond where it should have. As details regarding the hours and minutes leading up to the catastrophe surfaced, the captain was judged to be at blame. According to the cockpit recordings, the pilot Zlatko Gluica can be heard snoring for more than 100 minutes of the flight right up until the jet begins its descent. Gluica, groggy from his long snooze, noticed too late that they were not descending swiftly enough and were approaching the runway twice as high as they should have been. Despite his first officer's request to abort and go around 3 times, Gluica ignored him. In fact, the later crash assessment indicated that by the time he attempted to pull up, he could have likely saved the aircraft by using maximum manual braking and reverse propulsion, but he didn't do so. There were 158 fatalities and 8 serious injuries. Number 1, nosedive. A pilot error also caused the second deadliest aviation catastrophe in U.S. history, killing 265 people. On November 12, 2001, an American Airlines Airbus A300 was on a normal trip between New York City and the Dominican Republic when it crashed into the Bell Harbor neighborhood of New York. The plane actually broke apart in the sky shortly after takeoff. The vertical stabilizer and rudder parted first, followed by the engines, and the plane nosedived. Many people couldn't imagine a jet coming apart at such a low altitude, but investigators revealed that the plane's first officer had been violently alternating between rudder pedals. This had put far too much strain on the plane's vertical stabilizer, which then broke off. The pilot was attempting to stabilize the aircraft as it followed in the wake of another flight that took off shortly before 587, an effort that was eventually deemed unnecessary. The larger Boeing 77 was nearly 5 miles or about 8 kilometers ahead of them and the plane would have steadied even if the pedals were not used. When the plane's vertical stabilizer failed, calamity struck. The plane, no longer stable, dipped forward and into a flat spin, generating enough aerodynamic force to pull the engines from the frame. 5 of the dead were not passengers, but civilians injured by the wreckage fragments hitting the ground. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be on a plane full of crazy people or a plane full of snakes? Tell us which would be worse in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on The Bad Badger.